Today, I'm going to talk about a very important topic in counseling, that is the communication and building the counseling relationship. As the topic itself, if you look at it, has three major issues or the major aspects to it. First, the communication. Second is the counseling. And third is the relationship between the counselor and the counseling. So next about 10 minutes or so, I am going to talk about firstly these three aspects individually, and having seen them individually, then we will go and see how the interplay of all these three factors or three aspects plays out in the process of counseling. So first of all, we will look at what actually the communication means. Yeah, you can start. Communication actually is nothing but exchange of ideas, thoughts, views between people. Now when I say people, they could be two people or they could be a group of people. But basically it involves exchange of thoughts and ideas between people. It is also a means of transforming a mental concept from the brain of one individual to the brain of another individual, and more so in case of counseling, because in counseling it is basically the exchange of certain thoughts and concepts from the brain of the counselor to the counseling. So when we look at it, the communication per se in terms of counseling, this is the key aspect. And last, if I can try and put it, communication in the most simplistic way, it is that communication will not be complete if the message for which the communication has been originated has not been received. That means the feedback in communication is the key. We may keep talking for hours together, we may keep exchanging, but unless the message for which the communication has started does not get the feedback, or the message has not been received by the person, then the communication has not, the process is not complete per se. Next, we look at the counseling. What is counseling? Now, counseling, like we spoke about in the first aspect, that is the communication. Counseling is basically exchange of thoughts, exchange of ideas between the counselor and the counselee to provide some assistance to the person having certain psychological problems. And this exchange of ideas and thoughts has to be done in a little formalized manner, in a formalized setup. That is the key. It cannot be done in a casual setup or in a casual manner. It has to be a bit of informally formal setup, if I may say so, because what it actually entails is to facilitate the change in the behavior of the client, and that can come about if the communication between the counseling and the counselor is taking place in a little formalized manner. For that, it is important that there is a professional relationship developed between the counselor and the counselee. Having seen this, let's look at the next aspect of this process. That is, what actually are we trying to achieve through counseling? That means, what are the goals of this process of counseling when we talk? The first and the most important goal of counseling is achievement of positive mental health of the counseling. The very fact that the person has come to you to seek help So the whole aim or the goal of this process has to be the counselee achieving the positive mental health state. If I have to add another thing to this, that could be in case the counselee has a problem. So the problem resolution becomes the next goal. Similarly, the next one could be to help the counselee take a stage in his mental thoughts wherein he is made capable of taking decisions on his own rather than looking for someone for guidance or support. So that is additional goal of this process. Next thing which one can look at to achieve from this process of counseling is improving the personal effectiveness of a person. When I say personal effectiveness, it is in his personal life, in his professional life, in his social life, in his spiritual life, all around. And last but not the least is the change and modification in his behavior, his thought process, his approach, his perspective in life. So these are the goals of counseling. The next thing which we look at is after the goals, to build up the relationship, it's very important that the counselor needs to have certain basic skills and the understanding of those skills. We can also call them counseling skills. Now, what are these? First of all, the counselor has to create a setup which is relaxed and non-threatening to the counselee. When we say about relaxed and non-threatening, means the place should be slightly isolated, serene, quiet, wherein person can generally feel a sense of calmness about himself, and any thoughts of agitation, any thought of anger, any thought of depression which may have come into his mind before coming for this session, they are dissipated from the moment he is coming for this session with the counselor. So the basic essence is for the counselor to understand the kind of setup which he needs to create for the counselee and to establish the relationship. Next thing, if you look at is the ability of the counselor to listen and allow the counselee to express himself without being judgmental. Because the counselor should not use his own perceptions, his own experiences to sit in judgment on interpreting what the counselor is trying to convey to him. He should patiently listen to him, understand his thought process. In effect, most of the answers, as per the teachings of this school of thought in counseling, is that most of the answers actually lie in the questions. It's the technique of questioning which leads you to the answers which the counselor is looking for. Third thing is validating the client. That means the client has got certain inputs which he is sharing with you. If there is a bit of gray area in that, the counselor should be able to cross-check and validate the information which has been shared with the counselee, with the counselor. For example, let's say there's a point wherein the counselee is trying to say that he's scared of darkness. In that case, at some point in time, the counselor must validate by cross-checking from the client what kind of fear of darkness. Is it when he steps out of the house, or within the house, or when he's alone in the room, or even he feels the same kind of fear when he switches off the light? So that validation will allow the counselor to understand and pinpoint the actual reasons, what is holding back, what is troubling the client. And last but not the least is the process of leading the client to reach a position from where he can actually make decision on his own, based on his own understanding as helped by the counselor, and from the factors which have been explained to him, various issues, various aspects which is understood, and then make a decision on his own, rather than the counselor taking a decision for him. So these are certain counseling skills which are very important for the counselor to understand before going for this process to establish the relationship. Now, after this, we will take a look at how to build this relationship. Now, when we talk about the counselor-counselee relationship, it's based on trust, mutual respect, confidentiality. Those are the cornerstones, obviously, but certain guidelines which both the counselor as well as the counselee need to understand is that, first of all, it's a scientific assistance which is being provided by the counselor to the counselee based on in-depth understanding and study and experience of the counselor, which he is trying to offer to the counselee. It is not some sort of mumbo jumbo which is being passed on to the counselee. If the counselee and counselor can reach on the same page as far as this understanding is concerned, that the process is basically a scientifically validated process wherein a scientific assistance actually in terms of mental health is being offered to the counselee, that will make this process the success for which it is aimed at. Next thing is, the process also should make the counselee understand that this process basically is not to give him some magic wand to solve all the problem, but it is basically to make him understand himself. One cannot see the things when one is looking only from one's perspective. As a counselor, what actually is being done in this relationship is that the counselor is helping the counselee with a different perspective. From the first person, the perspective changes from first to second and second to third person's perspective. That helps the counselee to understand himself better, and then he is in a position to make decisions based on his understanding of the problem, his own understanding of his own issues which are bothering him, and how they will play out in the future. And the last but not the least issue in the relationship is confidentiality. The counselee should have the blind faith in the counselor that whatever is being shared, whatever is being spoken, will remain within the four walls of the room where the session is taking place. And he is in safe hands. If that trust can be built up insofar as the confidentiality is concerned, then the client will actually share all his issues which are bothering, and that will lead the whole process to its final destination, that is to help facilitate the counselee find the answers of his problems by himself. After this, we need to look at the types of relationship which a client and the counselor may have. There are basically two of them. One is professional relationship, and second is the treatment relationship. There is not much of a difference in both of them. In fact, where one finishes, the second one starts, and there is a bit of overlap between both of them. But to understand, one can just say that professional relationship is basically to lead to the welfare of the client. The professional relationship is established between the counselor and the counselee for the good or for the welfare of the client. And like I said, where this definition of professional relationship finishes, the relationship or the treatment relationship, which is the second type, actually starts from there. It flows from there. That is, from the moment this relationship, professional relationship, is established between the counselor and the counselee, the treatment relationship starts. There is no defined start point or the end point. From the moment the professional relationship is established between both of them, anything which is spoken, anything which is said, anything which is done, actually is part of that treatment relationship. It may be verbal, it may be non-verbal, it could be communicated through gestures, it could be conveyed through an object, irrespective. But all that forms a part of the treatment relationship. Having seen this, the last thing which we can talk about in this particular topic is about the qualities of an effective counselor, or the aspects of setting up the good relationship between the counselor and the counselor. Depends on few things. Firstly, it will depend on how observant the counselor is. When I say observant, it means he should have the ability to not only listen what is being said, but also infer certain things which are not being said. A person who's come to us in that state of mind wherein he needs help, he may not know actually what is bothering him. He may be talking about certain things which are peripheral. He may not be reaching out to the core issues. The counselor should have that much of experience based on his understanding of subject and experience. He should be actually able to understand the core issue which is bothering the client and lead him into talking about those issues rather than getting stuck in the peripherals. So the keen observation, whether it is through verbal or gestures or non-verbal, is the key. The next thing is, which actually flows out from the same point, is the counselor should be able to encourage the client to come out with his innermost feelings, rather than talking about things which are peripheral, which actually do not lead to the issues which are bothering the client. He should be able to encourage the client and lead him into through questioning to the points which clients actually is getting trouble with. Next is, client sometimes maybe from a different cultural background, maybe from different religious background. So the sensitivity of the counselor has to be in sync with the cultural, regional, religious aspects of the client. Hence it is important to have a bit of background information about the client before the session starts, because there are certain things which in a counselor's understanding, as per his culture, as per his perception, maybe not the right thing to do. But in the culture where the client has grown up, in his religion, where he's what he's following, what he's practicing, there may be certain differences between the client and the counselor. So sensitivity towards those aspects is the key, which will help establishing the relationship as well as understanding how to help the client. Next is active listener, which have already been discussed previously also, and I have already said this. Active listening involves firstly to understand literally what is being said. When I say literal, most of the times when we listen to someone, we try and juxtapose our own understanding of a particular word, which actually may not be the meaning, because a person may try to convey something else using a different word, which actually may have a different interpretation for the counselor. Hence, it is very important to understand and possibly record what is being said by the client literally. And then, once the session is over, try and understand, could this mean this or could this mean that? Because each statement may not have only one answer. It may have different interpretations based on the background of a person, based on his state of mind, based on his emotional mind. So that is important. That these are the aspects of active listening which we need to be aware of. Next is the counselor should be able to help the client to take decisions on his own. Basically, the counselor should have that capability to maneuver the conversation in a manner, take the client to a stage wherein he himself comes up with certain options, and then ask the client to pick an option rather than the counselor giving an option to the client. Because ultimate responsibility of the options being taken in the client's life remains with the client and not with the counselor. So it should be the client's decision to exercise an option. The job of the counselor is basically as a facilitator to guide him to take to those places and then pick an option from there. Confidentiality, we've already spoken, but again I will touch upon this, that this actually remains the most important key in the relationship between the counselor and the counselee. If the confidentiality, trust can be established, the rest all is just a matter of time before everything will be shared, and with experience and the knowledge of the counselor, finding a solution will not be a problem. Last but not the least, the counselor should be a relationship builder. When I say relationship builder, it need not go into a personal domain. It has to remain strictly in a professional domain, but the client should feel comfortable to fall back on the counselor in future in case he runs into a similar or a different kind of issues. That can happen if there is a clear distinction between the professional relationship and the personal relationship. If that boundary can be marked and followed by the counselor as well as the counselee, that will go a long way in setting up a beautiful relationship and a long-lasting relationship between the counselor and the counselor. So, like I said, the essence of building a relationship between the counselor and counselee depends upon the communication, how effective it is, and the process and the skills employed by the counselor to build that relationship. That's it, and I'm sure with this we will be able to improve upon our aspect of building a relationship with our clients in the future. Thank you.